Thank you, Nancy and Kishore and others here. I'm very pleased to be here and to share work we've been doing for a number of years. Let me just start with the slide. I need to look at these things too. As Kishore mentioned, that the work, of course, WMRC, old WMRC and ISTC been sponsoring our research in University of Illinois Mechanical Engineering Department, but also have gotten funding from a number of other organizations. I tried to list a little bit of that here in terms of where the supporting money have come for our research. We've been associated with WMRC and ISTC for the last, I would say, 11 years or 12 years almost now. And I'll give you a little bit of that in a minute. But the idea was that, we have a student named Steve Skurlus, who is now professor at Michigan, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. He has an interesting background. He was a student in electrical and computer engineering department at U5, and after second or third year, he started thinking about doing something different, something for the society, something for a little more things which have more societal impact. And one of the things he got was in the environmental aspect, and he basically started mingling with Kishore, and then this whole thing started. And then, of course, we were doing research in the metal working area, machining area, but not that much in the metal working fluid area. So we got interested in that, and then since then this marriage is going on. Number of people whom I want to thank before I start, who have been contributing to this work. Faculty, my name here, but my colleague Richard DeVore, who just has retired from teaching but is still very active in research. We've been a team for a long time. By the way, I just was introduced that I joined University of Illinois in 1979. In November of 1979, I'll be completing 30 years. So I've been here and with the department and engaged in various aspects of manufacturing research. A couple of postdocs, a recent one, Martin June, who is now professor at the University of Victoria, Canada. And then, of course, Steve Skurlus, as I mentioned, he's professor. Then Joe Eppert went to West Coast, working for Guidon. Mark Greeley, the more recent one, is in Cincinnati, Texas. He's a bit off working for IBM. John Wendt just finished his postdoc and PhD, now is a professor, just starting today, teaching today. Today is the first day at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. And Ham is gone for PhD at MIT, and then a couple of current graduate students who are involved in the working with us. So as you can see, a number of people over the years, for 11 years, have been involved in metalworking through research, with the idea that we try to deal with the practical problems as well as trying to satisfy the requirements for the master's and PhD thesis. So that's kind of the way this has evolved. And again, I want to thank Kishore and Tim. Been really very supportive of this whole work and co-authored a number of papers, publications, and theses with us. So if I summarize the kind of work we've been doing, most of the work we started doing with the microfiltration focus and looking at synthetic and semi-synthetic metalworking fluids. And Steve started actually mostly working in the synthetic working fluid bed. And he started looking at understanding the mechanism, essentially, of productivity loss during filtration or recycling. And then we realized that because of this loss, there is also depletion of chemicals which are good for lubricity and cooling. So then Joe Eppert came in and he started investigating more ingredient-wise effect of these things on performance of the metalworking fluid. And then we have a couple of students like Mark and Peter who started looking at evaluating the performance of metalworking fluid in machining, and did a lot of experimentation to understand the machinability as we change the composition and ingredients for this metalworking fluid. We made our own fluid, tried to study component by component, and then try to kind of evaluate. In that process, we also looked at what is the best way of characterizing or evaluating performance. So we were traditional tests like tap and torque tests, but also we tried to look at are there other machining tests which we can use to evaluate the performance of metalworking fluid. And we developed a drilling test bed where we could basically use the drilling process to evaluate the performance. So a couple of projects were sponsored by ISTC and the state of Illinois to continue to look into that test bed development. Then I think about 4 or 5 years ago, John came and he said, well, he wants to do the same similar thing, but he wanted to look at semi-synthetic metalworking fluid. And he started looking at filtration issues and again fouling and depletion. And then he started focusing and he sort of concluded that the pores get blocked, but it's not completely blocked. It's a partial blocking phenomenon. And he started digging into more and more of that. When he did some preliminary experiment, he found that there is a certain partial blocking going on. And then, of course, the basic aim was that, so what? What do we do with this? Eventually, what we need to do is to understand the fouling mechanism, and then be able to kind of design filters, so to speak. So that would be the goal. And then, of course, design the metalworking fluid. That is the way we can mitigate this problem. So that was the basic idea, and then with that concept, we started developing models because we can continue to do experimentation, and that gives us a lot of information about what is going on, the mechanism why. But still, in order to really do a very thorough job, we need to develop models, and that's very challenging, very hunting, but very exciting to us when we start thinking about how to develop a model to simulate this kind of process. And then hopefully through simulation model we can design better fluids and better filters. So that's the kind of work last 4 or 5 years, and I'm going to spend mostly time here to explain where we are with that kind of work, because it's really exciting, because it gives us a lot of control in terms of studying different kind of pore geometry, different kind of particle size, different type of filter material, and so on. So that's basically what we're looking into it. On the other side, my interest, as I said, I've been here 30 years almost. First 20 years, I've worked with companies like Ford, GM, Caterpillar, Deere, all these big hubs of machining, a lot of machining they do. So that's what our work was. The last 10, 11 years, our focus has been shifted to micro machining area. We see the micro manufacturing, nano manufacturing is really becoming a really hot topic. And so therefore we started looking at the micro machining. And once we got into micro machining, certainly cutting fluid is still coming into play. The challenge there is that how do we really provide the cutting fluid in micro machining, and what should be the right components, the right mix of the cutting fluid. In what way we provide the cutting. So this has become a really challenging problem. And right now, my most focus has been in the micro machining area. So I'll just introduce a few slides to show you that we have done some attempt in understanding the cutting fluid application in micro machining, and the challenges are there for everybody, including us, to see how we really solve this problem, because this is a very interesting and challenging problem. So that's a nutshell of what, where the whole roadmap you can think about last 10, 11 years of microfluidic research in our department working with us. So, the basic idea, let's see how much I can talk about it with a given time. So, it's only 15 minutes left according to time, and I have a lot of slides. But I'll try to see if we, can skip and give you some overall progress. Of course, this is a lot of you know about it. Metalworking fluid is really, used in machining for cooling as well as lubrication. Not just lubrication or not cooling. And then of course it also sometimes in the chip flushing, high pressure jets also use different kind of way, different mechanism of providing the fluids. The thing which to note is that this is the way we do in macro machining, large scale machining. But when you go to micro machining, these kind of techniques won't work because the tools and the workpiece sizes are so tiny that with high pressure jet is not going to work. It will break the thing. Certainly the distribution, the cutting type fluid, synthetics, semi-synthetics, oil-based, that's basically the kind of the statistics. That's what we got interested in, trying to understand a little bit about how these fluids be used in recycling, microfiltration mechanism will work. Health hazard, I don't have to speak about this to this forum. All of you know that metalworking fluid, there are both health and environmental issues, tremendous issues, and that's why you saw probably some of the sponsors like Chrysler or UAW was interested in some of the work we were doing at that time, where they were kind of having issues with the health, and of course anything in recycling and filtration you can do would be helpful. Similarly, the other issues in environmental you cannot deny the disposal of the cutting fluid is a big challenge. So therefore, recycling filtration makes a lot of sense. So then, of course, this slide is trying to say that there has been push in the metalworking industry to do cutting dry. Don't use cutting fluid because that creates a lot of health and environmental issues. So there's a lot of research going on in parallel with the dry cutting. It's been effort, but not very successful. And so, of course, there had been a compromise. We call it sometimes minimum quality lubrication, minimum quantity lubrication, micro lubrication. There are a number of ways people are trying to minimize the use of the lubrication and cutting fluid to still get the performance, but that's one way of mitigating the issue. The other issue is that microfiltration, and this is what we learned from ISTC over the years, and felt that this is something that we should investigate and work a little bit more about. So that's what I'm focusing on, microfiltration a little bit. And so microfiltration, as I said, again, this slide just talks about our research group has started this work with the WOWRC, Sustainable Technology Center, 11 years ago with Kishore's input. And he has been key from the beginning. Even today, any project we start, he is always our mentor for this. So goal is to reduce human health and environmental impact through fluid life extension. So this was the overall idea. Microfiltration, some of the basics, terminology, cross-feed flow, cross-feed velocity, transfer pressure, flux decline. That's what we're talking about. That's what the reason is why we're studying. One of the problems is that in microfiltration with the cutting fluid is that flux declines over time, and therefore, we need to see how we can design better fluid or design better filters. This is a quote from Kishore again, 2004 paper. It talks about reducing microbial concentration by more than 7 log using this kind of a microfiltration technique. So it's a very powerful technique to use. But the point is that why we are still not using it, and because of the issues of the fouling. So that's where we got interested. What are the mechanisms of fouling? How can we study more about this and try to understand the mechanism in which way these mechanisms of fouling takes place. So overall goal that we tried to set up for this research agenda was to sort of understand and develop a better understanding of the membrane fouling mechanism present in the filtration of microwater fluids. And then, of course, we focus on synthetic and semi-synthetic. So let's just give you a few slides, in Steve's work. Steve essentially tried to use the basic fluid and see how fouling is taking place, what is happening. That was his curiosity to start with, and then he also sort of used this idea of adding lubricant additive D41 biocides, which is what happens if you add these in terms of filtration. What is the flux? Fouling takes place. So that's where he started doing some experimentation, and And he found that the first slide it just shows that if you don't mix all these kind of things, additional outside ingredients, then flux decline is not that significant in the sense that it's steady state variation that doesn't block that quite quickly. But then if you add lubricant or defoamer, you can see the decline is more rapid. And so that's what he's trying to show in this data. And over time, you can see as soon as you add lubricant or defoamer, the flux decline is drastic. And so that's where he's trying to see what is happening, why it is happening, what is causing this fouling to take place. And then we started looking at the mechanism, understanding of this. He also tried to understand a little bit about the concentration. If you change the original concentration, then what happened, and the conclusion was that the minor concentration variation has a major impact on flux decline. So the concept here, he did a lot of time he spent really collecting this data, understanding that there is a fouling taking place and these ingredients are really making it worse. So therefore, we got to do something about it and understand. So he essentially tried to look back and say what people have talked about, what kind of fouling is taking place, and more construction, more blocking and cake formation. And these are the kind of ways blocking can take place for these membranes. And in trying to look at what is happening in his case, so he sort of went back and looked at these membranes and observed on the SEM images and tried to see what mechanism is causing this to be. So here's an example where he tried to show that with the aluminum oxide membrane, these field emission environmental SEM images used for basically non-conducting membranes and material, so that you can sort of see the fact that fresh versus when you have a little bit of this thing. Absorption could be leading pore constriction, which is the dominant mode, flux decline, and basically uncontaminated synthetic microwave fluid. But if you start looking and see what he was doing in the experiment, he was cleaning these membranes and then performing test again and again. So every time he was cleaning it with different water pH value, and he found out that there was always residual effect of the cleaning with the way he was cleaning. And clearly, in the slide, it shows that when you clean with water with pH of 5.5 versus 10.5, you can see that the lubricant is still steady, is still sitting on the membrane after cleaning when you have a higher pH value. The lubricant is not washed away. So that is a problem. Sometimes people think that cleaning will take care of the thing, but again, it depends upon how you're cleaning and what was the mode of cleaning. This was an interesting discovery because in the beginning we didn't care about that. We just cleaning it and using the same membrane for another experiment, and he found out that there's always this kind of residue left. So that was kind of way of trying to understand a little bit about what's going on. So Steve kind of concluded just by looking at that there is a fouling taking place, the ingredients are making a difference, initial concentration makes a difference, and the cleaning process really, affects this whole process of fouling. So that's the kind of things he concluded, and he left off at that place, and then he continued on his work on mission. Then actually John came and he started looking at semi-synthetic metalworking fluid, and then he restarted this thing with the idea that let's see what happened to fouling with these kind of metalworking fluid, and is there a mechanism of fouling which we can understand a little bit better. And then of course his goal was that I don't want to stop at that place, but I want to kind of go ahead and try to see whether we can develop a model so that we can design better filter or design better fluid. So he started the experiment again, built the setup, and then he did some initial experiment just to see this fouling thing. So here is some of the statistics on the membrane, for example, 5 nanometer and 8 nanometer, 2 pore sizes investigated in the experiment. And this is set up, actually it sits here in this lab. That's where he performed the experiment and varies some parameters, trying to collect some data to see what happens. And he basically ran just for 2 membrane 500 nanometer with these kind of constant operating conditions and so on. Let me just show you the data again here. that he found out that there is an exponential flux decline over time, slowly moved to steady state, and different type of membranes and fluids have different flux decline. So I mean, it's not really a very great finding, but the idea was that there is a certain flux decline taking place here with the semi-synthetic working fluid, and trying to understand again that this blocking or whatever fouling is taking place, why what is happening. So he again looked at the SEM images of these membrane. This is a fresh membrane, different magnifications, and you clearly see that all open pores. But if you look at clogged membrane, you start seeing these aggregates form, and that's what actually he was talking about. That these things start getting and start blocking. But not only that sometimes what he basically found out that you can assume that these aggregates block the pores, and therefore the blocking, pore blocking is taking place. But sometimes these aggregates are not big enough. They can go, pore size could be bigger, and they can go inside, and then essentially hinder the flow and partially block it. And that's where he started looking at more partial blocking phenomena. He also talked about that sometimes these aggregates washed away through this pressure and velocity, and therefore they would be basically unblocked pores. So he started looking at these things, and this is another image of different aggregates being blocking. So he kind of concluded basic experiment that aggregates are being formed, initial pore constriction and partial blocking due to aggregate deposition, pore blocking due to the formation of an aggregate layer of the membrane, and then it's aggregate large enough to totally block the pores, or basically they go there and partially block it. And he started thinking about how do I really take this physical process which I observe, model it, and then hopefully can simulate it. So that's where he got into his work, and he started sort of took the cross section of the actual membrane, because when you start looking at the literature, people have tried to do some of the work, but they always assume very simple geometry, and if you take the actual membrane, it's not the same way. So what John did is actually he took the cross section and he sort of tried to mimic as close as possible what the geometry is, pore geometry is, and then he modeled that part and tried to understand this blocking. And in this slide, he's just trying to show here this complete blocking, and this is kind of partial blocking concept. And then he developed a simulation where he tried to kind of, so what you see here, this is the kind of a geometry he's trying to model, a small section of the membrane. And then he's trying to see if when the thing starts, how the plot, what the blocking, and how this thing will take place. So this is the kind of simulation we started doing. It's a 2D simulation to start with, so you can always say that these membranes, these are 3D membranes. So how do you really calculate the flux? And that's a very difficult thing to do until you make some assumptions about it. But John essentially focused on 2D aspect of it and tried to start understanding exactly how the flow takes place, where the blocking takes place, and so on. And he did a lot of simulation. Then the other fellow came and he said, no, and also John basically did, when he did this, he used only hydrodynamic forces from the top to the bottom the flow is taking place through the hydrodynamic forces. But when you're talking about such a small particle size, there are other forces coming to play. And that's where this fellow came and he said, hydrodynamic forces, Brownian motion forces, electrostatic forces. At that scale, these forces will come and they can change the path of the particles as they move from top to the bottom. So these things have to be modeled also. So this fellow started looking at this model, enhancing the model, adding these forces, and then trying to sort of see the effect of that. So you see here, this is just what John's model was, and then when you have the other models also like Brownian, then you can see the phenomena is different. Brownian motion, Brownian forces really impact the flow of these particles. So the blocking is taking place in different locations, different pores are blocked. Similarly, he also looked at hydrodynamic and electrostatic forces. And what you see here is that when there is no electrostatic force, this is a kind of track, and then when there is electric force, this track is moving further away from where the blocking is taking place. So the electrostatic forces makes a difference also how these pores are being blocked and how particles move from top to the bottom as they move on. So it was kind of interesting to look at this way. Then this fellow went on and he said, I can basically simulate this whole thing, a whole progression. Over time, you can see which pores are being blocked as particles move in. And it's a very interesting scenario. The whole simulation starts from the top, and then you can see how the particles coming in and blocking different pores. So these are what this number shows is the particles blocking the pores. So here is this pore is blocked, and this pore is blocked. Now this pore is getting into this pore is blocked. And if you move on further, then you continue to look at these things, and you see finally after some time this whole thing is blocked now. There's no way this thing can move on. This is the last one, and then when this got blocked, this whole thing is completely blocked. So the point is that you can kind of now through model you can simulate it. You can understand what's going on. Now, of course, I can change pore size. I can study different particle size distribution. I can take different properties, different surface potential. I can change all these things to try to understand the effect of these parameters, so that I can design better membrane. That was the basic concept why we are trying to model and study. In fact, this fellow went on to, because as I said, that to simulate flux, you need 3D model. So he started looking at the 3D simulation now, and he started approximating the membrane as just to start with, and a lot more work to be done, but this is not here still active, but he just the preliminary work about a month ago was trying to show that you can do 3D modeling, simulate this to flux decline, and then he predicted that using this 3D model of flux decline how to. So now the model can really realistically start doing the flux decline curve prediction. So now we know what is happening. So just for curiosity, what we did, we said, okay, let's just design different membrane geometry, different pore. So he has different models here where he changed the pore size distribution. Here is a large pore and then a small pore. So these two simulations have different pore geometry. You can take this one, and this one has another one. So that means now you are designing membrane basically with the different pore size distribution. If you do that, then you can study the effect of the flux. In one case, flux decline is rapid, and the other faster than the other one. So this idea is just demonstrating the point that through the model I can study different design, and I can study different cutting fluids and so on. So that's where this work is concluded. At this point, there's still ongoing work right now. We just got the separate plan to continue to look at this aspect and see if we can design better metal working fluid and membrane. Just to give me, if you allow me, for just a few minutes, not too much, okay? Just 5 minutes maximum, to introduce this problem of micro machining. So miniaturization is everywhere now these days. And I remember that hearing aid used to be such a big thing here. It put in the backside. Everybody can see. Today, people wearing hearing aid, you can't even see. The tiny part, there's about 15, 16 component in the hearing aid. So the small you can make is much more acceptable. So there's a lot of micro parts are being made. A lot of manufacturing is being done, but, at a micro scale. So when you start looking at that, you can start visualizing. Of course, when we talk about micro and micron, your hair diameter of your hairs is 70 micron, and we are talking about machining sometimes less than 70 micron. Oh, just a measurement smaller than the hair. Okay, that is the scale we're talking about. Still not nano; it's a micro scale machine. So this is particularly like a gear. You can think this gear is made part of the pen. You can see how it sits on the pen. This is the size of the part we're talking about, and making features of different scale. This is the hearing aid part. So the idea here is that you do micro machining, making small parts. So then the question is that where the machine? You can, of course, use a big machine to make a small part. Doesn't make much sense. So we started building our own machine. Actually, this is our first generation machine we built in our lab. Now the fellows who built this machine started a company 5 years ago in Chicago, and they're doing very well. They started with 2 people, 2 students here, did masters, now started a company. Now they have about 14 people in 5 years. And this is, so they are making machines. They started this is their first machine they built it. So the machine is very tiny, as you can see here, it's about 180 by 180 by 300 millimeter size. So you can lift the machine and you can take it. The whole idea is that you can build a whole factory in your desktop. That's the basic goal for people now these days in this area. So this micro machining comes into play, and now the question comes, Let me go back to the slide here. So here if you observe, this is the spindle, and here is the workpiece put in there. And the workpiece is very tiny, and you are basically, and the tool is essentially anywhere between 50 micron to 500 micron. That is the range we're talking about. And 50 micron is smaller than the size of the hair. Hair is usually 70 micron. So these tools, cutting tools are available. People are making these tools. Somehow, how they are making it, they're making it. And the idea is that now the cutting tool is coming close to the workpiece. There's practically no room for cutting fluid to get inside, in between the tool and the workpiece. The space is so tiny. Your lubrication, when you provide the cutting fluid, the size of the, one drop of the fluid could be even thicker than the space we got. So that is the challenge for the cutting fluid manufacturer. What kind of viscosity and surface tension and other chemicals you put in there to do that? Or what is the mechanism of providing cutting fluid between the tool and the work interface so that tool doesn't wear out? Because tool wear is still a problem. If you do the dry cutting, it's not going to work. Tool is so fragile, it will fracture, it will wear out as you cut. So that's the biggest challenge. We started looking into this problem. So one of the ways we start thinking about how do we provide, of course, we know fuel injection system in automobile, people try to use this idea of atomizing. So you can atomize the cutting fluid, have atomized droplets. And then the droplets could be small size, 5 to 10 micron, and then you could go and you put it there. Then, of course, the challenge is that even though you get droplets, you put it on these droplets, when you inject the droplet on the surface, because it's so tiny that these droplets not necessarily will go there, slide there. It can, basically, you put it there, it can bounce back. So the mechanism is like this, where you can, the drop will be stick, rebound, spray, or splash. So when you're putting these spray nozzle droplets, atomized droplets coming on the surface, anything can happen. And our goal would be to sort of have a spray so that it can go in interface between the tool and work. And then only we can see the effect of the lubrication. Otherwise, it's not going to help. So that is the biggest opinion. Dynamics becomes an important research issue for us to figuring it out. What should be the pinion velocity? What should be the droplet size? What should be the orientation? And of course, the cutting fluid itself. What kind of surface tension? What kind of viscosity? What kind of other, physical properties we should have? So that is what we are trying to study. We did some preliminary experiment. In fact, we just bought the humidifier, like a nebulizer basically, and use that nebulizer to start atomizing the cutting fluid. And then, trying to produce the droplet and see whether there's an effect of this or not. So this is the initial experiment you see here. This is the tool, the workpiece, and then we develop a system where the nozzle spray coming in here. And we try to study the effect of this atomized spray on the fluid. And we found out that this data here shows that when we're dry cutting, the tool broke right here after cutting about 10-12 slots. When we have wet cutting, that means when we provide the atomized sprays, just keep going. We could cut 50 slots and tool didn't break or roll out. So you can see different effect of cutting fluid, atomized spray on different conditions and so on. We also tried, somebody suggested that, well, why you have to do this? You just submerge this whole thing into cutting fluid, and then you will provide the cutting. Well, the problem with those is that we did something like this, and then these chips which are coming out of micro machine, just like dust particles. So you can see the dust, how it can adhere to the surface when you have lubricant. So this particular picture is showing that after 3 slots, chips will start coming out, and then they're getting the surface. After 20 slots, all the chips are on the surface. You can't even see the original surface. These are coming back and getting onto this. Okay. So that's where this thing is going on right now. We're doing a lot of work in this area to try to understand how to provide metalworking fluid and machining micro scale parts. So just to summarize this and the challenges we have, of course we started looking at the 3-dimensional fluid dynamic model to simulate this whole microfiltration phenomenon and understanding the fouling. We are also trying to look at how we can redesign membranes and cutting fluid, reformulate cutting fluid, and then of course you can even complicate more by looking at the porous media type of simulation and then of course looking more on the micro machining side. I'll conclude here with this very quick summary. There's a lot of work going on. I can't talk a lot of work, 11 years we have done so far in 15, 20 minutes, but this is the kind of just what I just want to thank again for inviting me here and giving this opportunity to speak about what we are doing.
We do have some time for questions. If anyone would want to have questions, our second speaker actually will not be available today, so we do have time if anyone has questions.
Do you have a feel for the sensitivity of your CFD models for the surface charge? I noticed that you had it looked like a constant value, but I could imagine that.
We did study surface charge. We did put different numbers. And we, in fact, I don't have slide here now, but we did study minus 10 millivolts and minus 50 millivolts and see the effect of that. And there is an effect of that.
There is. Is it substantial?
I would say yes.
So I'm envisioning then that certain types of aggregate particles might have, if there's biofouling, for example,
Yes.
it might be completely different surface charge than say a native.
Very good. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. That's why you have to think about how exactly you're going to do this design. Like, there is an effect, substantial effect.
Has anyone looked at very tiny insects or mites as a possible source of lubricant, or a way of figuring out how they manage to maneuver the way they do?
I'm not aware of that. I'm not sure you.
I know.
No, I don't think so. It's an interesting idea. It's just like feeding away thing. I don't think I have seen much. Yeah.
I'm curious, in the membrane column, what is sort of the composition of the aggregate? I mean, are there a lot of different kinds of aggregates, or
They form over time,
Yeah,
and they keep, getting bigger and bigger. Okay.
Yeah.
And then sometime, of course, it breaks away and then move away.
yeah. But I mean, what are those? I mean, what are those actually? The aggregates are actually made out of. Just, I mean, things that what?
These particles, yeah.
What are the particles?
These are basically what you add as ingredients.
Yeah.
Sometimes some kind of defoamer you have added, or solid lubricants or lubricants, additives. Some additives, different kind of additives come into play. We don't know. We haven't studied that detail in terms of what exactly are causing what is in those additives.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't looked at that. Yeah.
So in your early talk, you actually mentioned there are micro beads inside your fluid. I also see you do have biocide inside your fluid. So why is this happening? If you have biocide which can kill bacteria, but you have bacteria growing inside your fluid.
What's the question?
So they're supposed to prevent the growth of the openings inside your fluid already. Then where
Well, we are trying to study the effect of it. How the filtration is affected by adding biocide. Okay, so if you put some certain, what would be the impact in terms of how? That's basically what we're not trying to analyze this thing. We're just trying to see the impact.
But I think he's asking, how are microbes growing in there if you have so much biocide in there?
Yeah, these fluids are abused quite heavily in the environment. So when you purchase it fresh, and then you put it, there will be very little microbial growth. But over time, these will get contaminated with external nutrient sources. For example, if you go look at a Caterpillar factory and look at a sump, people are spitting into it. Sometimes move water into it. They might add a burger to it.
It's not used in an academic. It's not used in an academic.
And then sometimes they add too much
situation.
water so that the microbial concentration gets diluted below its minimum inhibitory levels. So there are all kinds of reasons why these things break down in a real situation that you wouldn't imagine. You wouldn't even begin to imagine all the possibilities by which it can break down.
Yeah, if I could just comment, I work in places like that, and you just wouldn't believe it. You just wouldn't believe what goes in there. Or maybe you would, I don't know.
So considering your fouling from whatever the cleaning agents, actually whatever people are throwing ashes probably will contribute more to the bombing than.
Yeah, well-
Yeah, yeah.
Issue, that's an issue. That's where the recycling and, management is important. Good.